to another episode of E&F TV's Bridging the Gap. I'm joined today by Queen of M&E, Danielle Ravenscroft from Leonardo. Danielle, how are you?
I'm good. I wouldn't ever go with Queen. Sounds quite old. Go with
Queen,
Princess. So yeah,
Princess of M&E. Yeah, that sounds okay. We can
yeah.
do
I'm good. Who are
that.
you?
Yeah, good, thank you. And just looking back before the show, I've been trying to pin you down for half an hour on screen since like October, November, and you're obviously like super busy with, you were saying you guys have opened up the Grand down at Brighton within the last, say, 6 months or so. Great M&E potential. So I'm super grateful that you've like given me half an hour just to chat through. It's been like an enormous benefit for the students to hear about your career journey. So thanks for that. And so yeah, just tell us a bit about yourself. Tell us how you ended up in the position that you're in at Leonardo Hotels.
So I'm the Group M&E Revenue Manager for Leonardo Hotels, which was juries in probably up until a year ago. In terms of that, so I look after the full 45 M&E properties in terms of looking at their revenue strategy for meetings and events, looking at their forecasting, Christmas targets, anything that's M&E related and strategy based comes to me. And then my colleague Nikki in the business looks after the people side of the business. So I do strategy and she does people and process side of things. I've been at Leonardo for 8 years, 9 years would be come August. And I started as a revenue manager, single site revenue manager of Hinkley Island Hotel, which is a really large M&E property based in Leicestershire. I always say it's in the middle of a field. It's not, it's in a little town in Leicestershire, but it's a huge M&E property. So I was actually taken to do the full revenue piece for rooms and M&E, and that was about 8 years ago. So I did that for around 4 years, really enjoyed it there. I still love Hinkley and I spend a lot of time there still now. And then when we got our London portfolio, so when I joined the group, we had some larger M&E properties. They'd just taken those on board when I started. But then I've been in the company, we've just gone after these larger and larger M&E properties, which is perfect for me. But around 2019, we acquired 4 central London properties. And it was our first big step into London. We've got St Paul's, Tower Bridge, London City, we had Holborn at the time. And they all had massive M&E space. And so I was asked to go to London and I was the M&E Business Development Manager, which sounded quite salesy, but it was really the revenue manager of M&E for London. So then I looked at the strategy for those 4 London properties, and really I was transitioning the properties as well because they didn't have any forecasting. They didn't have any PACE documents. The previous owners hadn't really done that side of the business in terms of looking at it the way that we would want to. So I was very much in charge of putting the strategy in place for the people and the actual revenue structure of M&E there as well. And then I did that up until, well, COVID hit then, which that was fun in central London. So I worked through COVID and I looked after all of the estate with my colleague Nikki, and we were just doing outbooks, all the stuff that happened in the pandemic. And
Yeah,
then probably
cancelling all the events.
cancelling all the events, or at the start removing them all. I must have moved the same events about 5 or 6 times.
Oh
I
yeah.
actually even had an email the other day off someone who'd spoke to me in 2020, asked me about a deposit that had been moved on, and I was like, I have no idea, I've blanked it. I managed to find what she wanted. It was like I completely wiped that from memory. And then so I did that, and then when we was in the pandemic, we restructured the way we work with our smaller properties. So we hubbed a lot of the properties. So now we've got I think we've got 4 or 5 hubs now, rather than each individual site having an M&E executive. It didn't work from a consistency point of view, a payroll point of view. We weren't making the most of our opportunities in terms of working as a group. So we actually hubbed, which I know a lot of groups have done. So we hubbed a lot of the smaller properties. And then there was this need for a person that would oversee everything. So all the small hotels right up to St Paul's to the Grand, what does the strategy look like? What does the budget look like? How are we moving that forward? And that's pretty much my job now. And I've been doing that for about 3 years. Yeah, 3 years.
So it's interesting how you moved to a more centralised model where inquiries come in for meeting rooms, for instance, and are answered by staff in a hub. Do you have any staff on site? I presume when you're selling weddings that there's that need to show them around, the bride and groom around the rooms.
What we did during that time is I did some work around what hotels can be hubbed and it wouldn't affect anything in terms of the showround piece. If it's weddings, that type of thing, how would that work? and we have a number of standalone properties still. So you like the Pinkley, anyone that needs people to do show rounds and really be on site because it's an M&E property at its core. Hinckley, Oxford single site, Cardiff is, Cheltenham, the Midlands got a team on site. London centralised, but because all of our hotels are 5-minute tube from each other, it's not too bad, and we do have planning teams on site in London. But it was more those smaller hotels that are like mainly boardrooms for 10, 20, and I've got 10 of those rooms where you don't need a full team on site to do show rounds and to look after that business that we hubbed. But there is still a number of standalone properties on site where you need the full team on there to make sure that everything works as it should.
Okay. So where are the hubs based?
So we've got one up in Scotland. We've got one in central London. We've got one at the Midland for the Northern Hotels, and then we've got a new one in Brighton as well. So we've got 3 properties in Brighton now. In terms of how it's split, it's not always that if you're in the Scottish hub, your hotel's in Scotland. Most of our Scottish properties are. But as we've looked at staffing, and sometimes we go, well, we've got a gap here, it makes sense to move it to X hub because they find it easiest to recruit. Or we can move it down to here because we know they've got the bandwidth to take a little bit more. So we've really worked that to our advantage over the last 18 months, and they're in a really strong place now.
It's interesting. So as a graduate coming into the events industry, you wouldn't necessarily expect to be based on site anymore. Is that the way it's going, that companies are creating these hubs where you work in a cluster office similar to like how a revenue manager would?
I think definitely. I think just in terms of the way it happened originally because of payroll, whereas now it's not a payroll. I think it's just that it works better for us in terms of cross-selling the different hotels, especially if you're up in Scotland and you've got 5 or 6 hotels and 3 of them are in Edinburgh. We had 3 separate teams before, and as much as they tried to cross-sell, it's not like one person having all 3 diaries and they can put it into the right hotel and make sure the business fits. So they're really great. And central London, we had to do that because those hotels are so close to each other. They share the same inquiries. We had to have a centralised team for that, and because that's such a market where you just need to make sure you fit your diary with the right piece of business. You'll always get inquiries for London, but it's getting the right bits. So the whole hub environment works really well.
You obviously, whenever I talk to you, it radiates from you that you're quite passionate about the events industry. Have you always been that way? Did you? Because I go back to I was M&E manager for quite a few years in a previous life. I kind of fell into it. So as a young man, I left college. I didn't really want to go to university. And I remember going for a job as a hotel receptionist, and I didn't get it. But then I got a call back saying, "Look, we filled the position of receptionist, but we have another junior position as it was a special events coordinator, and it was focusing on these calendar events, basically dinner and discos, that kind of thing." So I kind of fell into it. Were you the same, or did you always, as a little girl, want to work in the events? You know, it's quite glamorous, I think, to some looking from the outside, not from the inside.
My dad was an operations manager, so for the Belfry Hotel, which is a large M&E property. So, and he did that. So he worked at the Belfry, my dad did, from before I was born, and worked there for, I think it was about 20 years. My dad was there. So I was always, I remember going to Christmas parties, they'd be at the hotel. So I love hotels, I've just always been in them. And when I turned 16, my dad was like, right, you can come to work and I'll give you some shifts as in C&B as waitressing. And I hated it.
Cheap labour.
I hated it. And because my dad had to stay till the end, I'd be at sixth form and there's like 3, 4 in the morning. I couldn't go home until he was ready to go. And my mum would go, you can't keep keeping her till 4 in the morning. She needs to come home. So I used to do those shifts and I was really bad. So my dad said, right, I can't have you in C&B anymore. You keep dropping plates, spilling wine on people. There's a job in reservations. They need a Saturday girl to input reservations. So I went and did that and I loved it. So I did, and it was like old school reservations where you're getting your faxes and inputting them from booking.com and
I remember it well.
Things. So I did that all through sixth form, all through uni. And I originally thought, oh, I want to be a teacher. And by the time I got to the end of uni, I just didn't want to do that. I kept working when I was supposed to be at uni. So I kept picking up hours at the Belfry and in reservations, and I really enjoyed it. And so I was like, well, I don't want to do that. And I think I'm pretty good at this. So I'm going to just see what I can do in the industry. And I think at that time, there's a very clear path. If you was a reservationist, because there's not many reservationists anymore, is it? Tends to be central res stuff. But it was
Yeah.
single site reservation, so I looked after the golf, the spa bookings, the group bookings. So I did that, and then I did that full time for I think 2 years, and then I went to be a res manager at Drayton Manor Hotel, which is a theme park property. And the
Yeah.
revenue manager there, Michelle, she's brilliant. She would let me get involved in revenue, and as a team, we would talk about all types of business. They had three big ballrooms there, and we would speak about
Mm.
everything as a whole. So me and the M&E manager would discuss all the bookings and would work together. So I was always around it in that sense. And then I got my first revenue manager job because mainly I started in rooms revenue management. And I would say to anyone, if you're going to do M&E management, you need to learn rooms first, because
Mm.
it's a lot of the same practices that you put against it. I wouldn't say you can just go into being an M&E revenue manager without knowing the basics of rooms as
Yeah.
such. So I then learned lots from my revenue manager at Drayton Manor. She was great. And then I went on to be a revenue manager at another property, Ramada, St Coldfield, and that had large M&E space, huge. And I think they could do like 800 in their ballroom. And then I was in charge of the M&E team, the res team, and reception. And I had to put all the calendar of events together. And that sounds like the Hotel Europe where they did all the tribute nights. They did the big
Mm.
conferences, the self-catered weddings, they did everything. So I was in charge of the strategy for both. And again, I really enjoyed the M&E side of things. Not that I don't enjoy rooms, I just think M&E's got more to it than rooms sometimes. And then I did that for a year, and then I saw the job at Hinckley. And in that property, it's everything is about M&E. If you don't do your M&E budget, you won't do your rooms because everything feeds off the whole M&E pipeline. And
Yeah.
that's where over that 4 years, I was so heavily involved in everything M&E that I can't imagine working in a property that doesn't have that anymore type thing.
Is that
Um,
because something on a basal level excites you about working in M&E? And if so, what can you put your finger on what it is?
I think it's like with M&E, rooms is very steady. And I know you have your peaks and troughs and you have your corporate groups. And if that drops out, there's a problem. But I think with M&E, every day and every month, okay, your budgets might be the same and you have the same seasonality each year, but it's like a game of poker where if you don't pick the right booking and you don't put the right strategy in, you're not going to do budget or you're going to massively overachieve budget. And you get these bookings that come in and there's no rhyme or reason. You can do all your pacework about when your inquiries come in, but you'll get like what I call a unicorn booking that comes in and it's for 500 people and they've got no budget and it's the next week. Like that type of stuff is why every day is different. And that's
Mm.
the exciting part of it. It's like a big jigsaw and everything needs to fit together. Because unlike rooms, you've only got really usually a handful of meeting rooms. It's not like with rooms where you can have 200 beds. I haven't got
Mm.
200 chances to get it right in terms of M&A.
No.
So it's getting the right piece of business for the right price, for the right length of stay. And I think that's
Yeah.
part of the enjoyment of it. It's a bit riskier.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I totally get that. Would you credit those, just rewinding a bit, would you credit those early days of spilling wine on people and food and learning at that young age? Would you credit that with the development of your soft skills?
Yeah, definitely. And I think in terms of especially M&E revenue management compared to rooms, I found that I would be speaking to clients so much more in M&E and same with the agents that we deal with. So even now I will have conversations with booking agents. And if I didn't have those skills of dealing with the general public from the start, you just wouldn't know how to go about having those conversations in the right way. So I think it's really important. And I think you understand the upside of things as well. I really struggle sometimes when people who haven't done an upside or seen it making decisions because I think you don't know how that's going to
Yeah.
impact that side of things. And
Yeah.
don't get me wrong, I'll always maybe disagree with that to try and push it a bit further to get more numbers in. But I understand
Yeah.
the value of how that hotel works, the pressure that's
Yeah.
if you're turning a room around 3 times, okay, what does that mean for the team? What does that cost? Because it's great that the money's coming at the top, but what is the ultimate cost of putting these events on? I think it's really important to understand everything
Mm.
that goes on because M&E properties are so busy. It's so different to like a hotel with just beds. You know
Yeah.
yourself, it's sick, isn't it? And there's lots going on all the time, and it's a
Mm.
bit of a
No,
buzz about the
absolutely.
place, isn't there, when there's a meeting on a big event?
Yeah, it certainly creates a buzz about the place that you don't get from a hotel that's purely bedrooms. Just zeroing in on a bit of a point you made a second ago about the importance of ops knowledge. I remember initially I was working, as I say, in the special events role and selling, and then meetings and events and selling. And then I took some time out to do like I think 18 months training management program as it was billed. It was an internal thing. You worked in each department for
Oh,
3 to 6 months. And it gave me such a knowledge of wider the impact of my decisions on other departments. Prior to that, I was just all sales. I'd sell anything, not think about the logistics of providing the service, staffing costs, turnaround times. I'd take a conference for 300 that went left at 4 o'clock, and then another one in at four, for 500. And it's just like, and the ops teams used to say, when are we supposed to turn this around from a theatre style to cabaret?
yeah. It's
And
making sure that you can
I
do
feel
the.
like,
I mean, I'll always say I will always push it, and I know it's tight sometimes. But if it's the best revenue decision, when I was in Hinkley and had the office, I go right. If we all need to come down at 4 o'clock and turn the table, we'll come down and do it. And that's
yeah,
another thing that's nice about it, especially like if I think about things like Christmas. I really miss being on site at Christmas because
yeah,
it's a nice atmosphere. Everyone's in it together. It is manic, and it's the lead up to Christmas is up. Like Q4 is so busy. You've got all your corporate stuff going on up until the middle of December, and then all the Christmas parties at a weekend, and it is hard for the team, but it's a really nice time. Lots going on. Everyone's in it together. I mean, sometimes people might lose their head a little bit, but it's in the grand scheme of
mm.
things, those are really enjoyable times. And you're working long hours, but it's enjoyable as well. It's rewarding as well.
You're all in it together. Yeah, you're all in it for that beer after work at 4
Yeah,
a.m. before you start your shift again at
yeah.
6. Only joking, that's the old days.
They
But
don't like that.
so
Yeah, I don't think you do those type of shifts anymore.
certainly used to. Let's say theoretically or hypothetically, you're looking at taking on someone in a junior meetings and events position. What skills are you looking for at that level and maybe the one above, let's say meetings and events manager?
In terms of entry level, I think people sometimes think that you need to have some type of background in events planning or something, but really, we've even found after the pandemic, there used to be a nice pipeline of people that had some experience, whether they'd been on reception or a res agent or they'd done M&E somewhere else, but we just haven't had that. So we have taken a lot of people from different industries, and they've worked out really well. So for me, it's things like, are you resilient? Because it is hard going sometimes, and it is, and like I said, Q4 is always the worst time, and I have to remember people, it's just this quarter, and then we're going to go back to normal, it'll be a bit easier. So resilience is definitely one. Attention to detail is so key. And that helps with the whole revenue side of things. If you've got people that are just inputting and trying to be data inputters and not thinking about what they're inputting, that
Yeah,
would be a problem. But it's making sure you've got the right attention to detail. And then, for example, level customer service as well, because you're going to have a lot of people that have never planned an event before. So if
mm,
you get someone in and they might need a lot of hand holding, they don't know that you need dietary requirements and timings and insurances sometimes for certain types of events. So it's making sure that you've got the right level of customer service to one, convert the business. You've got to be a bit of a salesperson to get the deal across the line. If you're doing
yeah,
planning as well, you need to have that eye for detail and attention to detail as well. And then for managers, the revenue side is so important because they're in our company. So I oversee the forecasting process, but the managers do their own forecasting and I check and give feedback every week. So they
mm,
need to have some level of revenue management experience within them or be learning to do that to make sure they're forecasting correctly. The point of the forecast is one, so that ops can do their staffing correctly. I know what's coming into the business. I can tell our owners and John, our head of revenue, what the performance is looking like. But they need a handle on the commercials of it as well as how the office is running itself. And that's a really hard job, that is. So you've got to find someone that's got some revenue experience and people management as well.
mm,
But that all comes if you've been in the industry and you've been an exec, you've been around it, and we try and get our teams involved in the whole revenue conversation as well. So we do RevMax meetings. We do so this week. I've done a kick-off with the team at the Grand where I said, this is your budget, this is what we're working towards, and this is how we're going to do it. So we get everyone involved in that conversation, which is really nice.
And I think the skills develop as you go through your career in events, don't they? You may find that you're in a meetings and events position and actually you enjoy the sales side of it. So you go more into business development, sales manager. You may find that, the organization of it is for you and then take on a more ops focus role potentially.
Yeah.
It's quite a unique skill set needed, isn't it, really, to be a successful M&E coordinator or manager?
Well, we do as well. So in our bigger hotels, we have event planners who do the final details, and we have inquiry handlers because they are very different skill sets. And if you're in
Yeah.
central London and you've got 5 events for 500 people, you can't really coordinate them as well as trying to keep on top of your inquiries. So we
Mm,
have separate teams, and it's very much of you can tell who's a planner and who's an inquiry handler. But in the smaller hotels, you do a bit of everything, which I think is great to
yeah,
do anyway. I would advise that if you're going to get into it and move along with it, that you do both sides because you need to be able
absolutely.
to know both sides of how that works to move on with it. But there are
Yeah,
even when I think about, there's lots of different career options that you could be an inquiry handler or a planner. As you're a planner, most people would tend to maybe do the ops route. They're more involved with the ops teams. And if you're an inquiry handler, it's more about conversion. You might go down a salesy route. So there
yeah,
is lots of different routes that come from those roles as well.
yeah. No, absolutely. And the level of detail and attention to detail I need to apply to, say, final details, wedding appointments,
Oh, massively, yeah.
plus the soft skills needed to handle um, bride and grooms, which obviously it's quite an emotive time, isn't it? Wedding.
Yeah, for weight,
Um,
you get a lot of weights that come in, and you've got the
yeah.
the family of it can be really difficult sometimes. I think sometimes we forget that we might ask an inquiry handler to go down and have a conversation about a wake, and then the next time they're looking at a corporate event for 200, which is a very different feel. You're dealing with an agent that hasn't got an emotional attachment to what you're discussing. So you need to be good with
Mm,
people in that sense as well and understand how to give them what they need based on who they are and what their event is. That's really important
yeah.
as well.
Yeah, and these things sometimes can happen back to back. You may be faced with um, excited bride and groom with a wedding show round, and then half an hour later you're talking to someone planning a funeral,
Yeah,
um, which is a skill in itself, really, to switch from
massively.
matching the excitement of the bride and groom to sympathizing with someone who's a member of the family may have just died.
Yeah, it can be difficult, but I think it's really good practice then for anything that you move into in the future in terms of a role. All those
Yeah.
things, those experiences, just meant that when I'm in the role that I'm in now, I'm comfortable to have conversations that are difficult, or it
Mm,
stands you in good standing for the rest of your career if you do those things at an early stage, I think.
yeah. Fantastic. How do our graduates get into? What's your top tips for initially getting into the events industry and then thriving, like, once you're in there?
I think in terms, there's lots of different routes into it. So, like I said before, if you haven't got experience, no any experience, don't think that you can't apply for an M&E executive role because we give you all the training that you need to do it. And like I said, it's very much learning on the job. Then there's lots of
Mm,
different pathways through into it as well. So recently in one of our hotels, we've had a few new recruits from reception. And that's a nice pathway into it because you already know part of the system. You already do a lot of the meet and greets to customers. So the natural next step would be to do those bookings. If you're into reservations, you can work through it into that way because groups, teams, and M&E teams will work together. I think it's just if you are already in a property and you want to do it, you make the M&E managers aware that you'd be interested in it. So that if any roles come up, they think of you.
mm.
And if it's something that you're thinking about getting into, if you see a job, don't think, oh, because I've got no experience, I can't apply. Definitely do apply because we are looking at those CVs now.
Yeah, fantastic. Sage advice. Daniel, thank you so much for joining me. As I said before, you're super busy. You're expanding all the time, and massive amount of hotels to run the M&E operation from. So I'm genuinely like thrilled to have you on, but also really grateful that you've given up, say, half an hour of your time.
That's okay. Anything to get more people into it, I think, because it's not that it's a closed shop, I don't think, but I think since the pandemic, it's taken a bit of a beast, hasn't it, about in terms of a career.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
anything you can do really just to get more people involved and keep them in the industry is great.
And I think you've really dispelled some myths because, as you say, since COVID, people have maybe thought, don't really want to be getting into the events industry after what happened, and you've kind of
Oh no, it's
shown that
well,
it's obviously booming at the minute from what you say.
it's had a great year last year. This year looks to be great. Our Christmas was better than 2019. So events are very much back to, if not higher than pre-pandemic levels. And yeah, I don't have any concerns about that anymore. I think when we were in the pandemic, I really did have concerns, but I think the business started coming back 21, 22, and since then, last year was like a normal year for us. So yeah, I wouldn't be worried
Yeah.
about that in terms of longevity of a role, because I mean, that would never happen again in our lifetime, you think. So yeah, I wouldn't be worried about it from that perspective either.
Yeah. I think anyone looking to get into the events industry or with any questions can certainly contact me on LinkedIn. Are you the same, Danielle? Would you
Yeah, of course.
encourage
Yeah,
candidates to
if
reach
anyone's got
out?
any questions, or if they're interested in any roles that they see for Leonardo, just drop me a note and I can give you some more information and put you in the right direction if it's not me that's doing the recruiting for that role. So yeah, definitely we're always looking for people that want to get into the industry and put their all into it really.
Brilliant. Danielle, thank you so much.
No problem. Bye.
That's all we've got time for this week. Give us a like and share the videos because it helps us attract cool guests like Danielle, and we'll see you again next week.
Here we go!